And hello and welcome. My name is Martin, and today what we're going to be doing is we're going to make our character actually appear as their legs are moving, right? So we're going to be putting animations into our character's AI, so then that way they will, when they go from their running to idle or to pause to running to pause state that has been put into their AI, they will actually, their animation will match. Instead of just looking at them looking like they're floating across the screen, they will actually look like they're walking. Now, the way that we're going to do this is by using the blend space that we created earlier for the Murdoch character. I right now have the Revan character because I'm going to show you an example of how this actually looks. So basically, what we need to do, I'll show you the demo in a second. The blend space is going to create the blending between the animations. So that is going to, on one side of the equation or on one side of the timeline, we're going to have the idle. On the other side of the timeline, we are going to have the running state, or in Paragon's terms, they use the term jog. So we're going to have an idle to jog. That blend space will then be put inside a animation blueprint that we created, and that blueprint is going to be what controls basically the skeletal meshes and decides which animation gets played at which point. That also has its own blueprint, so there's a way to put code in there as well to be able to create the different conditions for the animation. So that's going to be taking place here, and then after the animation is complete, we then attach it to the character and then make sure that the character is listening to that animation set as opposed to a different animation set. So basically the order goes blend space, we're going to make that first. That's then going to be added to our animation blueprint, and then that animation blueprint will be added to our character's blueprint. All right, so with all that said, let's go ahead and see the demo real quick and look at the way this character is moving. So as they run, they are no longer doing that solid pose floating across the floor thing. They actually indeed, it looks like they are running. When they pause, get this guy far away. And when they pause, you can see that they go into a stance. Okay, so let's go ahead and recreate that animation or that condition, so then that way our Murdoch character, instead of floating around, looks like he's actually running. Okay, so let's hit escape. Close. Let's go back to A_enemies. Let's go to the Paragon character. Let's go back to Murdoch and open up his BP. Well, actually, I'm sorry. We don't need his BP open right now. Let's go to the the idle to jog Murdoch. This is the blend space that we created earlier, and one thing that I want to show you about how this is actually working is, remember that when we created the blend space and the animation blueprint, it asked us what skeletal mesh we wanted to attach it to. So there's the skeletal mesh. This is the obviously the blend space that I created. And if we go into our animations, you'll see that that is the one right up here at the top, right? So the blend space is on top, but if I wanted to, I could click and look at other animation sets here. But we're going to leave it on that for right now. Now, the other thing I also want to bring to your attention is that if you needed to, you could go back into the skeletal mesh, and you'll see that that opens up a additional tab up here at the top. So we are able to now freely go back and forth like this, or we could do this very easily right here. It's identical. It's the same thing. So with the skeletal mesh, the interesting thing about this one is that you can go into preview animation, and you can go through and preview any of the animations that are set up for this. So it looks like in this one, he's grabbing something and sticking it in his pack, like he's picking something up off the ground and putting it on his pack. Let's go to, let's say, another animation. Let's say fire reload. Okay. So you can see that those animations are there, and knowing that these animations are here, that might make you want to build code for certain things. Knowing that there is this animation, I could sit there and go, okay, well, maybe what I want is when he picks up his ammunition, or if there is a, let's say, an inventory system that holds a certain number, at the end of that inventory system, he can reload based on magazines, which would be a secondary part of the inventory system. So you have individual bullets and magazines, right? And you could have him trigger this animation when he loads a magazine as opposed to when he's firing the gun. So, you know, I would look through these. in his character set alone, there's over 212 animations. So I would look and see what type of things are available here. Let's see, like shield. That's interesting. Okay, so it looks like he's now like shielding himself. And then you could put a different shield here, I guess. But he's in the pose now for that shield. Let's look up death, because we will eventually put one of these in there. So this is what the character will look like when he gets hit by the Nerf ball. All right, so that's skeletal meshes. Now from there we can go to mesh. And if we click on mesh, we get to see all the different materials that make this character up. And if there were anything that you wanted to change about the way the character looks as far as looks, you would do it here. Now with the animation, this is the blend space, because here you can see the animation, which is the blend space, and we'll get to that in just a moment. And then the other thing that I also want to bring up to your attention is the blueprint. Now if you were to click on the one right now, you would see the blueprint that is actually attached to our character at the moment, or one of the ones that came in with our character, I would say. Don't worry about this. If you click on the downward arrow, you will actually see two Murdoch blueprints, the one that came with his character and the one that we created. So let's go ahead and click on the one that we created, and we should see this. If you don't see this, go to over here to the left hand side underneath the example of your character, click on anime graph, and it should take you to the anime graph. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to actually close out of all the tabs, and I'm going to open up the ones that I'm going to need. So let's open up the blend space. Okay, go underneath blueprint. Don't pick their blueprint, pick the one that we created. So the Murdoch underscore animation underscore BP. So that's our blueprint. So then that'll open that up as a tab. So we have now these two tabs. Again, remember this is in the anime graph, so we'll click to anime graph so we have that page. And then from there I'm going to close that again, and I'm going to open up the Murdoch underscore BP blueprint, the character blueprint. So now across the top, those are the three tabs that I have. So I have the blend space, I have the animation blueprint, and now I have the Murdoch blueprint. Okay, the character blueprint. So starting with the blend space, what we'll notice is that we have a timeline. That timeline has a beginning at 0 and a 100% on the end. What we're going to do is we're going to put the idle mode on the front side, and we're going to load the jog to the back side. And what that's going to do is, as we drag this across and change the variable from not moving to moving at 100%, we will see the character slowly go from standing there to whatever his idle state was to actually running. Now, before we do that, let's go over here to the left-hand side, and not underneath skeletal tree, but underneath asset details. Let's go ahead and name this blend space, or give it, let's call this the horizontal axis, let's call this speed. Okay, the other thing we want to do is leave the minimum value at 0 so that it matches this, and then we want the maximum value to be 375 or 350. Actually, it depends on how fast you want to be able to outrun your character. Our main character is running at about 375, so if we keep them at a faster pace than what our characters are running at, we'll be able to outrun the characters. So this is good. So then that way, if you wanted that type of an aspect in the game, at least this way we'll be able to run away from them. So now that we've changed that value, the next thing we want to do is change the animation. So let's look for the idle state. So I'm going to type in idle here on the side for the asset browser, and I can actually, sometimes it'll show you a little animation there on the side, sometimes it won't. Like this one has what it might look like. So let's grab that idle state, and I'm going to drag it, I'm going to put it at the 0 value. So this is now the animation that we have. So he's standing there, he's no longer in that, the G.I. Joe pose, or it looks like he's kind of wiggling a little bit, right? So if we wanted to, let's say, try a different one, we could grab a different one and put it there and see if we get something different. Now, the other thing you can also do is grab these and delete them from the graph. So if you select it and you hit delete, it should delete it. Let's right click. If I'm not mistaken, you should be able to delete this. let's hit delete. Okay, so I was hitting the backspace key instead of hitting the delete key. So if you hit the delete key, it will actually delete it. So now let's grab a different animation, put it in there, and see what that one looks like. So this one, it looks like he's doing a little bit more heavy breathing. So let's grab that one again, and this time hit the delete key. And let's grab another one and put it over there. Now the other thing is remember that you could have also checked these animations underneath the skeletal tab, and you would have already known which one you wanted to instead of having to like click and drag, click and drag, click and drag here. Both ways are fine, you know. But if you know what animation you want, you can jot it down, and then you can kind of like, again, sometimes you can kind of see a little demo version of it down here. Sometimes it won't actually give you one. Okay, so from there, the next thing we want is to hit jog, because remember these characters are, the Pargon characters are using jog as their run. So we have a running backwards, and we have quite a few different runs, like if they were running in a circle or running on a pivot. So what we want is jog forward, and we're going to put that at the very end. So now, because this little green mark is right here in the middle, we're getting a sort of like a little bit of a walk. So let's slow it down here, and now we're going straight into that idle pose, and then let's go back to this point, and now we're going into a straight run. Now the in-between looks a little jerky, and that is probably because the idle state has a lot more animation in it. So even though it looked cooler because they were standing there and they were kind of had like a little bit more movement, when you kind of blend it, it doesn't look as nice. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to actually remove this one. Again, with the delete key on my keyboard. Now that we only have one state, no matter where we go, it's always him running. So let's go back to idle. And let's grab that first one where he wasn't really moving around too much. And let's see, even though that one may not look as cool, it might do a better job of giving us something that looks a little bit less jerky. Right? So now his head doesn't look like it's like twitching out like it was earlier. And the transition is, for the most part, somewhat smooth. Okay, so from there we have now created the blend space and done everything that we need to with the blend space. So again, let's just go back and look what we did. We named it speed, so you'll see down here that this blend space now has the target speed. You can see that the minimum value is 0, the maximum value is 300, so that way that's what speed full jog will look like, or full run would look like. And then we have gone down the list over here. We have selected the animation that we want, and we have placed one at the beginning of the animation and one at the end of the animation, and we can use the slide to go back and forth and check what that animation looks like. Okay, so once we've done this, we can now click over to the blueprint. So let's click over to the blueprint. And inside the blueprint, what we want to be is we want to be on the animation graph, and we want to be able to pull in the blend space that we just created. So what we need to do is we need to create states for our player. And what that means is that we will be telling the player what condition we want them to be in. Are they going to be running? Are they going to be idle? Are they going to be jogging? What are they going to be doing? So what we need to do at this point is right click here, and we're going to type in state machine, and we're going to add a new state machine. Okay, this state machine, we can go ahead and name it. Let's go ahead and call it idle slash jog. Maybe slashes are sometimes dangerous. Let's call it idle to jog. And if we click, we now have that. Now from there, the next thing we want to do is we want to connect this to the outward pose. So basically what we're saying is whatever the end condition of this, we want this to be the final animation that the character is getting. You'll also notice now that the idle to jog has been placed here underneath our animation graph. Okay, from there we need to double click into our idle to jog. So let's click in there, and you'll see now that we have an entry. This is what's going to happen. Let's click and drag off of this, and we need to create a new state. So the first state is going to be idle to jog. Okay, so once we have named our new state, we need to double click into our state and open up that state. So in this state, we're actually going to need to create a variable, and we're going to plug that variable into our blend space and have that be the end result of our animation. So let's go into variables. This needs to be a float. So we are going to be getting a number value from this. And once we've turned it into a float, let's go ahead and call this speed. And remember that we have earlier we have that animation that is called speed, right? The blend space itself, the name of it was called speed. So this is how it's going to be coming in. So let's add speed. So we're dragging speed as a variable. We're selecting the get speed so that we have an instance of it here. And then from there, we're going to go to our idle to jog, which was the blend space that we just created. And we're going to grab that blend space, and we're going to connect speed as a variable to the end result. All right. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and hit compile and save. And there is still a few things that we need to do. So let's go and just make sure that everything is saved before we move on to that next step. Okay, so before we can move on, there's two things that we have to do, two last things. First of all, we have to program the Murdoch anime blueprint, or I'm sorry, yeah, the anime blueprint, and we want to go over not to the anime graph side, which is what we have been working on, but over to the event graph side. Now, the event graph side is going to be programming the AI to do certain things or not to do certain things. And then the two the nodes that we see there, one is called event blueprint update animation. When this thing is connected, it's going to continuously keep checking to see what type of animation it is, and this is going to then supply information about which animation is actually playing, so then that way we can then move off. Let's look at what this looks like when it's finished. So this is the piece of code that we're going to be creating. Now when we look at it, we see the two that we were introduced to just a second ago. Right now what's going to happen is it's going to go to an isValid. The isValid is basically going to say, is there animation moving? And if so, send it over to this variable. So the two variables that we're going to be looking for is, one is the object falling? And then we want to get the velocity. Now for the movement and for the blend space, the only part that we really need is this piece down here at the bottom. We are actually going to go ahead and put this piece of the code in because in the next tutorial we're going to create a unique animation for the falling. So there is an apex fall, which looks like they've tucked their knees underneath and they're doing sort of like the I don't know, the Matrix pose where, you know, homegirl like jumps up in the air and the camera swings around, right? So that, you know, like if they caught them in that pose, this is what sort of the apex looks like. And that will then be, so if we find that the character is falling, it'll then send it to that animation instead of giving us the walking animation. So as a brief explanation, more or less that's what that is. You have the auto update, which is checking to see if there is animation, which animation it is. If this is valid, if there is animation, then it's going to send it over to the in air, and once it passes through the in air, it'll go to speed. And again, this piece right here, here it's just more or less passing it through. Here, this will be for when it's falling. And what this is going to do is get the velocity of the character, associate that through what's called a vector link. So it's going to figure out where the first point was and the second point was, figure out how fast you're moving, and then based on that, it's going to give us a speed variable or a velocity variable, which is going to be plugged in as a number into speed between 0 and 100. And then that will then affect the animation that we created in the blend space. Okay, so let's go ahead and make one of these real quick. So the first piece that we're going to need is the isValid. So let's go back to Murdoch's animation blueprint. Again, we are in the event graph. Let's type, click and drag out and type in isValid. Okay, so that'll be underneath utilities. The object of the isValid is going to be the return of the getPlayerOwner. Again, this is the target is an anime instance or an animation instance. The next thing we need to do is click and drag out and get velocity. Okay, and that would be the bottom one as we saw in the example earlier. And then this one is going to be get movement. And then, you know what, let me check and see which one it is. So get movement component. There we are. Okay, so these are going to be what it's going to be checking. It's going to be getting these values, and then we're going to be checking this against. Now we are going to need to create a variable. The variable is going to be is falling. Oh, no, is in air. Sorry. Okay. And this is going to need to be a Boolean because we're going to be looking for a yes or for a no. So if it's true or not. So now that we have that variable, let's grab and drag that out. Let's go set in air. Let's type in is valid to the set in air. And then the last one coming off of this one right here is going to be the speed variable. So we're going to type in speed, get speed, and then attach that to that. So now we have the top part of that completed. Let's get the part for the is falling. So here we need to click and drag out and type in is falling. So it's going to be looking to see if the character itself is in a condition called falling. And if that is true, then it's going to play this condition in air. From there, we need to get the speed. So now we need to do is length, vector length. And we want the, I believe it's the first one if I'm not mistaken. Let me go back and check. Yes, it's the vector length. So don't get the one. Let me do that one again. There's a few of them in there, so this is why I say be cautious. So we type in length, and there is vector length squared, vector xy squared. So we just want the first one, vector length. So vector, remember, is a position on the grid, and length is measuring distance. Once we have that, we're going to connect that to speed. And we should now have this piece of the equation going. Let's double check it against what we had earlier. That looks the same. So now we should be able to hit compile and save. And what we'll see is that the blueprint animation begins asking the question, is this valid? Is there animation going? What type of animation is it? Is it that the component is falling? And if it is falling, give us this. And then if it's not falling, go back to giving us speed. And if once falling is finished, give us speed. Okay, so once that's there, let's go ahead. We've already hit compile and save. And now we need to go into the character's blueprint. And we need to go back to mesh. And right now we have, if you don't have the right animation class in there, make sure that you go use animation blueprint. And then the one that we have been working on has been Murdoch anime underscore BP. So make sure that that is the one that you place in there. Go ahead and hit compile and save. And then open up any other tab that needs to be compiled and saved. Make sure that you have it all saved. That's other character, but that's all right. Okay, so at this point, we should be able to put our character out on the floor. So let's go back to A_enemy. Let's go back to where we have our Murdoch character. Let's grab Murdoch, put one of them out on the floor. Let's rotate them first, so then that way they're facing away from us, and maybe we'll get some of the roaming instead of the chasing right away. Let's push play. Okay. Let me go ahead and shoot him, get out of the way. And we indeed have now a Pargon character who is running, shooting, chasing us. And let's see if we rock back into our area. If he does not, he does indeed, go and start back to roaming. Okay, fantastic. So, all right, so we'll see you back in the next tutorial. Hope you enjoyed this one and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.